Many are speculating whether President Trump could intervene in the New York City mayoral race, and socialist candidate Zohran Mamdani is worried.
My administration would be Donald Trump's worst nightmare. How else can you describe a president who has sought to entertain suggestions of deporting me, of arresting me, of taking control of the city over the will of New Yorkers?
The New York Times is reporting that the president is silently backing Andrew Cuomo and claims the two held a phone call. But both parties have denied this. Cuomo says he believes Trump may actually prefer Mamdani.
I could see him saying, I want the assemblyman to win because politically I can make a lot of points with him politically as evidence that the Democratic Party has lost its mind, and I can then exert more control over New York City because I can say that he is unfit.
Okay, so Lisa, let's go back to what Mamdani said, how his administration would be worst nightmare for President Trump, who this week has a meeting with Vladimir Putin. He bombed Iran. He's in the middle of a standoff / negotiations with Xi Jinping. However, his worst nightmare would be the guy right now who's running to be the mayor of New York.
No, but he should be New Yorkers' worst nightmare. But unfortunately, they don't seem to have woken up yet. I mean, this guy is a grifter. I mean, he's an Instagram influencer. He's literally done nothing with his life. And the New York Post analyzed his work history and found between 2014 and 2020, he only had a job for like 3 years. And then he gets to the assembly and, according to the Post, missed 50% of his assembly votes, tried to be a rapper, was unsuccessful in doing that. So he has no idea what he's doing, but he's good at social media and he's good at getting likes.
Yeah.
But that's going to destroy the city. So, you know, I don't think President Trump's afraid of him, but I think New Yorkers should be. But I don't know how much President Trump getting involved would help Cuomo or anyone else, because he got 30% of the vote in New York City. So I'm not sure how helpful that would be, to be honest.
Cuomo's got his own problems.
Yeah.
But George Will was on Bill Maher and had this to say about the run.
I want him to win.
You want him to win?
Yeah. I think every 20 years or so.
Wait.
We need every 20 years or so, we need a conspicuous, confined experiment with socialism so we can crack it up again.
Tom.
Well, does he remember de Blasio? I mean, you know, de Blasio was very far left, and I would call him a socialist. You know, so I think, and you know what? New Yorkers rejected him. They knew how bad he was when he was hawking those stupid hamburgers for vaccines. They were sick of him, and they were ready to get him out of there. Mamdani is a creature of Trump because everybody is. All of the modern politicians, AOC is around because of Trump. Mamdani is around because of Trump. The Squad is around because of Trump, because that's their version of hardball, is going far to the left and being, you know, social media savvy. Obviously, I agree with you, Lisa. There's not much to him. I do think that he's not as much of a shoo-in as everybody around here seems to think. Oh, he's headed for victory. I think Cuomo is in a pretty good position to pull off a victory, but I don't think that Trump should get involved. Cuomo's right. I'm sure it happened because Trump calls people. He calls people all the time. And if the president calls, you're going to answer the phone. So I bet Cuomo answered the phone and they had a chat. He doesn't want to be associated with him, though, because that would only help Mamdani.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Well, meanwhile, D.C.'s most popular socialist is targeting Kamala Harris.
One of the reasons, in my view, that Kamala Harris lost this election is she had too many billionaires telling her not to speak up for the working class of this country.
And earlier today, Senator Bernie Sanders doubled down on attacking her.
Her core consultants, you know, were heavily influenced by very wealthy people. How do you run for president and not develop a strong agenda which speaks to the economic crises facing working families? I don't want to rehash that campaign, but I think the clue to Democratic victories is to understand that you got to stand unequivocally with the working class of this country.
Okay, so Dave, we're not going to rehash the campaign, but we're going to rehash the campaign.
Well, let me tell you that the billionaires out there, because we're all millionaires,
The billionaires are the problem, and Kamala should have listened to them. Look, Bernie Sanders got his nose under the tent. He's handing it off to AOC and Mamdani. Jasmine Crockett, who doesn't show up for work 50% of the time, like Mamdani. This is what's happening. By the way, let's not call Bernie Sanders a socialist. Look at his policies. The guy is a communist. He always has been. He's very clear about his policies and where they are. And you know what? George Will, I wish he'd at least give a little credit to Thomas Sowell on this, and I happen to agree, but I'll credit Thomas Sowell. Sometimes you have to flirt with, or sometimes you have to experience the failures of socialism, and the fact is New York is about to do that. Cuomo's political career is dead. He's got a body bag count to his decisions in the state of New York during COVID. Eric Adams is a tracksuit trying to keep his job, and Mamdani's got the vote of the progressives and the white liberals, especially young white liberals and leftover hippies. And sadly, New York is going to have to flirt with this to make Bolshevik Bill de Blasio look like he was a walk in the park.
Can I just talk about Bernie Sanders, or this is going to drive me nuts? I am so tired of being lectured to about the 1% from the 1%. Bernie Sanders is the biggest political leech and grifter, potentially in political history. The guy's been in politics for 44 years. Outside of that, in the private sector, he would amount to nothing. He needed politics to obtain wealth. And then he has the audacity to go after people like Donald Trump and other people who have actually built things, who have created jobs, who have created wealth, who have actually done something with their lives. Unlike Bernie Sanders, who leeches off the taxpayer, becomes a multimillionaire or becomes a millionaire from it, and then criticizes the capitalism that gave him capital. So I cannot stand him, if I've not made that clear.
You know, Tom, in 3 months, it's going to be 1 year since the Democrats lost, right? And they are still out there having this very public conversation about what went wrong and how can we go forward, but they don't seem to be moving in the same direction.
Yeah, and I don't agree with George Will. I don't think you learn anything. He seems to think that we're going to have a socialist in New York and then we're going to get it out of our system. Nobody learns anything. I mean, look at Seattle, look at Portland, look at Baltimore and Cincinnati. They run these cities into the ground and they keep getting reelected. Look at Chicago. They reelected someone worse. So I don't think these people learn.
No. Good point.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.